He is the grandfather of modern horror. His works shaped authors like Stephen King and Neil Gaiman. His stories influenced games, TV series, comics, metal bands, and even plushies. He's world famous, except he's not. It is spooky season and welcome to the cosmic horror that is H.P. Lovecraft. Now, as always, I will be linking all the books I talk about down below in the description box so you can do your own research. Born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1890, Howard Philip Lovecraft didn't really have a great childhood. Losing his father at a young age and living with a bit of a tyrannical mess of a mother scarred the boy for life. He suffered from depression, a whole plethora of phobias, anxiety, you name it. He was in and out asylums all of his childhood and he wasn't even well enough to attend school. The only thing that kept young Howard Philip Lovecraft going were books. Now, despite this lonely, scarred childhood, Lovecraft somehow managed to get a job as a journalist, even make some friends and even get married. The young couple moved all the way up to New York, which proved to be both disastrous and fruitful for the author. While it was here that he met some of his friends and contacts in the publishing industry that would make his books go all over the world, Lovecraft hated New York. He hated how it was crowded, he hated the noise, and most of all, he hated the multicultural society. Because you see, saying that Lovecraft was a bit of a racist is underselling it. In the end, Lovecraft fled the big city. He went back to New England, left his wife behind, and started writing again. He fell back into his old habits of being a social recluse, and the only contact he had with friends was through writing and letters. Now, while his friends absolutely loved the stories that he was writing, the public did not. They found it to be strange and unsettling, and they didn't care for it at all. The rest of his lifetime he battled with poverty, malnourishment, depression, and ultimately cancer. He died leaving a whole lot of stories, but no success. While the public may have easily forgotten about Lovecraft, his friends didn't. Specifically, August Derleth, a writer friend of Lovecraft, decided to give the old master of horror the literary send-off he deserved. After Lovecraft's death, he decided to publish all of his stories in hardback format. And again, it was resoundingly unsuccessful. But here's the thing about August Derleth. He was absolutely convinced of the genius that Lovecraft had written, and he had very, very deep pockets. He kept at it. He kept publishing all of Lovecraft's stories until finally, in the 60s, people started discovering this new author. With a renewed interest in both horror and science fiction, all of a sudden, Lovecraft had become fresh. People started delving into his stories and found this whole vast universe of cosmic horror. And they loved it. And ever since, the influence that Lovecraftian works have on modern pop culture is undeniable. So what is it about the strange work of this master of macabre that entices the public so much? Lovecraft is not about gore. Lovecraft is not about jump scares. No, Lovecraft is all about cosmic horror. At the center of cosmic horror is the idea that human beings are insignificant and inconsequential in the scope of the vast cosmic reality. Humanity is at best a nominal footnote. Characters in cosmic horror stories often skirt the line of rationality and sanity. Sanity is displaced as a fragile and tenuous thing, with the experience of the horrors of the true nature of reality being enough to drive one to madness. Lovecraftian stories are not about good and evil. They are not about a hero against the enemy. They are about an insignificant, tiny speck of a human who finds out too much. So, where do you start? Where do you start reading H.P. Lovecraft? As always, I would suggest you start with some short stories. The Call of Cthulhu and other weird stories are an ideal gateway into the vast cosmos that Lovecraft created. They will give you a feel of his writing style. He has this very singular, somewhat strange writing style in which he loves to use big words. Lovecraft loved to skirt up against all things academia, possibly to make up for his lack of schooling, and that is reflected in his writing style. It takes a bit of getting used to and it might not be for everyone, but that's where these short stories come into play. They will introduce you to the world, to the cosmos and to the whole idea of cosmic horror. This bundle contains some of his best stories, from the first story he has ever published, Dagon, to the utmost masterful Rats in the Wall. This is Lovecraft at his best. This is proof that he is up there with other big names from his time like Edgar Allan Poe. He truly is the grandmaster of these shorter, unsettling and sometimes very strange hauntingly stories. They are ideal for spooky season, for darker, gloomy afternoons, or just, reading something different. From there, you can go to the novels. If you're into sci-fi and like aliens, I would recommend The Whisperer in the Darkness. This story is a very interesting blend between horror and sci-fi and deals with extraterrestrial sightings. It is a chilling meditation on belief and religion. Lovecraft was a very firm atheist after all, but on the other side also about the morality of science. This story is more message than monsters, although it might contain a brain in a jar or two. I will leave it up to you to find out whose brain that was. If you want to dive more deeply into the Cthulhu mythos, however, I would absolutely recommend At the Mountains of Madness. At the Mountains of Madness is a novel about a failed expedition to Antarctica. It is told from the perspective of one of the expedition leaders, and he relates on how things got wrong. Suffice to say, they found out some things, and those things went bump into the night. This story is dread as an art form. It is told so vividly and so realistically that you would almost believe it to be a true story. It has a very vivid and frightening world building, and it is a very good showcase for the fact that the monsters are the stars in Lovecraftian stories. From there on, you can return to New England for one of the many stories in fictional towns that Lovecraft placed there. The Shadow over Innsmouth, the Dunwich Door, those are all classical Lovecraftian stories that are worth a read. But it doesn't stop there. Because Lovecraft, the Grandmaster of Horror himself, is undying. Lovecraft always motivated his own friends to write stories in the world that he has created, and that's exactly what people are doing today. Take away the misogyny, take away the xenophobia, and all that's left is some excellent Lovecraftian horror. First one up is Neonomicon, a graphic novel of comic book legend Alan Moore. This is a story of two young, cocky FBI agents who are investigating a series of occult, ritualistic murders. Now, as their investigation progresses and they stumble upon the world of the occult and arcane, they start to suspect they're on the trail of something rather awful. But in the end, nothing can really prepare them for the creeping insanity and unspeakable horrors they will find out in this small town of Innsmouth. Now, Neonomicon is possibly one of the darker stories Alan Moore has ever written. It takes us back to the harbor town of Innsmouth, which we already know from Lovecraftian works. It is cosmic horror at its best, and it has all of the Lovecraftian elements that we like so much about this genre. So if you want your horror to be a little more graphical, then by all means, Neonomicon by Alan Moore is a great place to start. Next one up for me is Dreams of the Witch House, an anthology of female voices in cosmic horror. This is an anthology of 19 cosmic horror short stories, all written by female authors. These stories tend to focus a bit more on a personal horror and less on an all-encompassing cosmic horror, and thus fill a gap that Lovecraft himself never really filled. This is an excellent place to get rid of all the misogyny that Lovecraft brought and get some female voices into the void. Not all of these stories are brand spanking new, but they have aged ever so well. So if there was ever a time to realize that cosmic horror is female, this is the book to do it. And since we're getting rid of things, let's get rid of the xenophobia as well, with the Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavalle. This book is the story of an Afro-American musician in jazz-age New York. That's right, it has all of the things that Lovecraft hated. It is often called one of the most nuanced 21st century retellings of Lovecraftian horror, and I absolutely love this book. This book takes all of the Lovecraftian elements that make the subgenre so special, but makes it very, very readable. Yes, this story is very now. It is entertaining, it is even funny at times, but it is also a very clever commentary on all of the xenophobia and racism in Lovecraft stories. If there is any author I want to see do more with Lovecraftian horror, then it is absolutely Victor Lavalle. So if you love the cosmic horror but can't really get used to the way Lovecraft wrote, then absolutely try this book. Another great example of the things you can do with Lovecraftian horror are the Cthulhu Casebooks by James Lovegrove. The Cthulhu Casebooks marry two excellent fandoms, being the Sherlock Holmes fandom with the Lovecraftian horror. Now, while I thought at first this was a recipe for disaster, it somehow works very well. Now, while still a genius, all of a sudden Sherlock Holmes is no longer untouchable. He is just another insignificant speck of a human pitted against incomprehensible cosmic horrors. Holmes no longer needs his cocaine solution to fight against boredom, but to forget the things he saw. And it makes for some excellent reading. The Cthulhu Casebook series honors both Lovecraft and Conan Doyle in an excellent way. With the fourth installment in the series coming out somewhere in November 2023, James Lovegrove has created another great example of the things you can do with Cthulhu. So if you want a different spin on Holmes, or you're just looking for some books that will keep you up at night, I highly recommend the Cthulhu Casebooks by James Lovegrove. And last but certainly not least, we have The Fisherman by John Langan. This story from contemporary horror writer John Langan is a story about two widowers. They both lost their family and have bonded over their love of fishing. Intrigued by the stories of Dutch Creek and the promise of fantastical catches you can get there, the two set off on a journey to find out that they might have caught more than they are bargaining for. The Fisherman is actually two stories in one book. On one hand, it is a very heartfelt story about loss and grief and mourning, but on the other hand, it is also a very, very resounding horror story that will have you biting your nails and actually be dreading to flip the page. The Fisherman is an excellent example of contemporary cosmic horror, and while the book doesn't really borrow heavily from Lovecraft, the influence of the master is never far away. This book is a very immersive story, and it should be read by any fan of the genre. The Fisherman by John Langan is our last recommendation for today, and an absolute modern masterpiece of cosmic horror. And now, I want to hear from you. Are you a horror fan? Are you planning to read something spooky this season? Let me know down below in the comments, and we'll talk horror books some more. That's it for me for this week. Thank you for watching. Leave a like, leave a comment, and in the meantime, if you need some more good book recommendations, you can always go here.